Hello, everybody. Welcome to the 19th episode of the ProShip ParcelCast and our first annual ProShip Tech Talk. Today, we are going to be focusing on technology. This episode is probably not going to be for everybody, but the more technologically inclined you are, probably the happier you'll be with this one. I'm Justin Cramer, co-founder of ProShip. With me today, I have Jeff Lukaszewski, Director of Research and Development at ProShip, Clint Boaz, Senior Sales Engineer at ProShip, and Cody Remmel, Software Architect for ProShip. And you know what? We're just going to jump right into it with probably one of the more esoteric and technical arguments that most people won't understand. And our audience wants to know tabs or spaces. Okay, so Jeff, I think I'm going to start with you. What do you think? Tabs or spaces?
Tabs all the way. No other choice. It's just tabs.
Just tabs. You know what? I'm with you because tabs can be realigned inside your IDE. They take up less space, and I think they're just easier to use. Cody, what's your thought?
Oh man, over the wire, always tabs, pure bytes. On machine, it's grown on me. Consistency, use what the IDE gives you. We are primarily a .NET shop. Spaces it is.
Spaces for local, tabs for the wire. That's a new one.
It's transparent in the IDE. You hit tab, you get 4 spaces. You never think about it.
Okay, Clint, your thought?
Well, as somebody who started programming, and when I started programming, used neither tabs nor spaces, and no indenting in my code whatsoever, everything was left justified, until I ran into a coworker who had to clean up an application that I wrote several years later and complained about it. I realized you need to choose one or the other. And for me, it was tabs. So I'm in on the tabs.
And you know what, Clint, I'm with you there probably for similar reasons, because I started coding back before there were free IDEs. And so you ended up using text editors.
Yep.
And I'm sorry, click, 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 click on the space bar is way worse than a quick click on the tab bar as you need to. All right. So let's continue forward here to something probably a little bit more serious. CI/CD, or continuous integration, continuous deployment. Let's talk about that, because it's definitely something that ProShip we're continuously talking about, but I don't think we've really defined, because let's face it, just about anything in an agile world has a very flexible definition. So Jeff, again, I'm going to start with you. How would you describe what CI/CD means to ProShip?
Sure. We can start with just even the definition of it: continuous integration, continuous deployment. Sometimes it's continuous delivery. The continuous integration part of it is a fancy way of saying you're using source control, like Git, that will allow you to have multiple devs, working on a single project, pushing changes multiple times a day, continuously, nonstop, just making changes, smaller bits and pieces. The continuous delivery or the continuous deployment just means more frequency, smaller chunks, which of work to reduce cost, time, risk of delivery changes. And the deployment part of that is for automatic deployment. In the case of ProShip, we have a build server, we use GitLab, and that helps us work inside those confinements. And
Cody, did you want to add anything to the deep technical side of that?
Sure, absolutely. With CI/CD, it's all about reducing the time spent by our devs and our QA team and anybody who might be reviewing our software, but reducing the time that they have to take getting that software out and spending more time on the planning, more time on getting the fix or change or addition, get that right, get it in. Don't worry about the surrounding process. It's all about automation and shortening that.
Yeah, features and bug fixes are no good sitting waiting to be deployed. The sooner customers can have them, the better. And this is what I always analogize this to. That's one of the things you usually get with a pure cloud-based solution, is you're getting that always up-to-date feature. And of course, our customers, some of them are privately hosted, some of them are in various clouds, some of them are on old school physical hardware. And the fact that they can get that same feature set that somebody who's using a cloud native solution with all of the security, the ability to customize, and the ability to meet their specific needs, CI/CD really just helps us blend all of those things together. Clint, did you want to add anything else on CI/CD?
Yeah, I would just say, in terms of what it means related to versioning, it essentially allows us to continuously release changes to the software and not tie them to a specific package, a specific version. A lot of IT departments are very specific about their scheduling for taking versions. A lot of other integrated systems may only be certified to work with a vendor's particular version. And if you're tied to that vendor, they may not allow you to upgrade to their partner's version. So just an example. So a WMS perhaps that's connected to ProShip, maybe they might, in a traditional environment, ProShip were traditionally version releasing software, might only say, version X.N is as far as we'll let you go until we release the next version of the WMS. Rather, it allows ProShip to continuously update independently and not necessarily be tied to a specific version, perhaps that WMS is certified to work with. So it just allows for a more flexible integration of shipping software like ProShip as it relates to other systems and as it relates to scheduling of updates, because it's not tied to a particular version release schedule.
So yeah, so it's kind of hard to talk about CI/CD without talking about updates. And the fact that ProShip last year we released over 300 updates to various engines, components, new features, functionalities, rate updates, functionality updates as the carriers required, is really just a lot of updates that are necessary. And I think this, I'm going to pull a component forward here in the conversation, separation of concerns, because I think one of the things that a lot of even engineers would ask is, well, if you're running updates all the time, if I've got a new UPS engine, a new FedEx component, a new on-track or Purelator, doesn't that mean I need to retest everything? What happens to all of my business rules? Okay, and the answer that we have here at ProShip is proper separation of concerns. So I'm going to throw this one out there to whoever wants to start answering this first. Can you talk about separation of concerns and how, what ProShip's philosophy is with an end result, or at least an eye towards the fact that we can update our carrier components without risk to our customer specific business rules and configuration?
This is one area where ProShip, I've been with the company for 11 years now. Long before I joined, the software picked a really good direction. The separation of concerns happens to line up pretty well with a very popular term these days, domain-driven design, where you've got a given domain being isolated and having a component dedicated to understanding that and living that and protecting it with what are also known as bounded contexts, where you've got these things communicating but protected from each other. You don't have your business rules from the company doing the shipping muddying up the business rules, so to say, of the carrier themselves. And in that way, ProShip had a really good head start in the separation of concerns world, which very good decision made well ahead of even when I joined.
Yeah, it allows you to update the carrier side of things to stay, cutting edge carrier compliant without risk of mucking up all of your shipper specific business logic that you have and vice versa. Again, since there's a separation of concerns there, you're not tied to implementing a new set of business logic whenever you're trying to implement a particular carrier compliance version package that maybe you've scheduled later on down the road. It gives you a lot more flexibility between those two things to be able to treat them independently, so that if you need to make a change to your business logic tomorrow, you can do that and not have to wait about a few weeks from now. We're scheduled to get the carrier compliance update, and we're going to do everything right back then.
Cody, I want to drop back to something you said, and I'm going to get it wrong, but in your domain-driven design, you talked about something that made my brain think of strict contracts. Do you remember what that was?
Strict contracts. Well, domain-driven design, typically you have you've got your core being your domain. You've got your entities, and you've got the business logic around those isolated and protected by application and infrastructural level interfaces. So those are the only pieces. Think of it like an onion. At the center of the onion, you've got your domain. The next level, you've got your application and infrastructure. So your infrastructure might be your database, and you'd isolate that. And you've got your application, which if you're making a web server, you may have your website controllers, but you don't want your website controllers changing to affect your domain. You want them to be isolated. You want them to be controlled communication-wise through passing messages via an interface of some kind, and that's really what that's all about, and that's what protects different parts of the business or different businesses in an application from each other. Makes an application very flexible and maintainable over time because those things haven't been spaghettied together, so to speak.
Am I wrong in thinking that the those interfaces that you talked about, we would want to change those interfaces as infrequently as possible to provide backwards compatibility?
Well, absolutely. And when you have to change them, do it non-destructively. And if you run into a situation where you can't avoid that, it's all about communication. You have to go old school.
Excellent. All right, I'm going to move us back on to target here. Bring up probably something that's a little newer for ProShip, and a question that I know Clint and I get asked pretty frequently. Well, what's the difference between Auth0 and OAuth, and why in the world is ProShip using this? Jeff, let me start with you on this one.
Sure. So OAuth is the modern open standard protocol for delegating authentication to third-party software providers such as ProShip. And we are adding that to our software as a way for customers to communicate or to authenticate with us instead of us having to have their credentials. Makes it easier for customers to have a more secure experience with our software. And we've chosen our provider to be Auth0, but that doesn't mean a customer can also bring their own provider if they want.
Excellent. And Cody, I'm pretty sure you were the architect behind this. Do you want to give us a little behind the scenes or add anything to what Jeff said when it comes to the use of OAuth?
Sure. Yeah, it's all about it's all about delegating things that are not part of ProShip's core business. If we're in the business of writing, manifesting software and connecting to carriers and providing visibility, doing all these other things, authentication it's kind of like logging. You consider it a solved problem. You reach to other people who have spent the most amount of time getting the experience and knowledge necessary to do that well. And in the case of this will bleed over into Auth0 a bit, but in the case of OAuth, first of all, I chose OAuth 2 as the protocol starting point because continues to be the industry standard for delegating authentication and authorization to other provider systems. If we don't want to be responsible for taking in those credentials and acting on them, and all we care about is prove you are who you are, make whatever claims you want, and we will assess whether or not you can view the screen. So we would rather delegate that to another provider. And if that provider is one of the industry winners, and a market leader in this case is basically you've got Auth0, and then you've got Okta, I believe Okta, and they're the same company now. They're actually one acquired the other, and sort of whichever one we went with, it would have been fine. But from a software perspective, it's easy. Since we're delegating, I think it's either 2 or 4 fields that have to be filled in our configuration, and now you're pointed to that auth provider, and it's done. And with that, we have choices.
And that's this provides a level of authorization that is standard in the industry without us having to reinvent the wheel from the sounds of it.
Absolutely. This brings along a lot of security assurances.
Excellent. Did anybody else want to add anything else to OAuth, Auth0, and any of that authorization question that's been asked?
Yeah, I would just maybe kind of clarify in layman's terms in case it wasn't clear that, I mean, the basic difference is that OAuth is a protocol and Auth0 is a company that produces a solution that implements that protocol and provides a lot of additional features around the implementation of that protocol. So it really comes down to, as Cody's described it, it's really what we call a buy versus build decision. You could either take the OAuth standards and implement them yourselves with a lot of pain and a lot of ground up reinventing the wheel, or we can partner with a provider like Auth0 that has already done that very well and provides a lot of other capabilities around that implementation so that we can place them in our solution to make it much more secure, which is top of mind concern with many of our customers. We transact in shipping data, which is not the most sensitive of information, but really it is personally identifiable information, and that we transact with customer contact information, names and addresses. You want that secure, and by providing this capability in our interfaces, in our tools, it gives our customers a much greater assurance that they're not going to have unauthorized personnel getting into that data, getting into the configuration information for ProShip and causing mayhem.
And also, we're not going to have unauthorized personnel shipping or therefore spending company resources without authorization as well. Jeff, did you have anything else you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, just that it's also a good solution for, encompassing anything you need. Desktop applications, web applications, mobile applications. It covers the whole gamut of things you need. So, you don't need multiple solutions. It's kind of nice and elegant that you can have this one solution to fit all of your needs.
Excellent, excellent. All right. So I'm going to move on. The next several topics will be around business rule management. And one of the first ones is near and dear to my heart, having made many mistakes in the past. And that is prescriptive versus algorithmic business rules. And I like to just quickly to set our audience here, a prescriptive business rule is basically a series of switch cases or if this, then that, else if statements, right? And there are reasons to use one versus the other, whereas an algorithmic business rule is a lot more flexible, takes a lot more outside information, and does things in an automated fashion, okay? Who wants to start with their opinions about the use of one versus the other and how this not only affects our customers when they deploy their business rules, but also how it can affect the changing of those or the speed at which we can change those business rules in the future?
So I'll tackle the prescriptive. I think the prescriptive business rule is really the easiest kind of conceptually to grasp. You mentioned it, the idea of a switch. I think of it as if this condition, then do this output. So an example would be if this destination use this shipping service. Maybe it's something like if shipping to the state of Florida, use a carrier second day service. The inputs on that, I think, can be, we typically think about them as being things like, it could be a destination. So if this destination, it could be a weight break. If greater than this weight, do this. It could be based on a customer number. It could be based on a customer type, maybe like the difference between a wholesale customer or a retail customer. It could be based on an item. If this item, then do this output. And then the output is typically something like choose this service or choose this rate shop group or produce this document or disallow this shipping method. So I think a prescriptive business rule, as the name implies, it's a prescription for a particular condition. And it works pretty well when the logic is very simple, when one input drives one expected output. And it provides a lot of opportunity to make some business logic that is very flexible in terms of the way it's managed. If we're able to, put the business logic more in a table, those inputs and output pairings in a table, it allows us to configure those inputs and output pairings in kind of a non-technical fashion, where rather than writing some big jumble of code to manage those things, we can have the code instead look up those input-output pairings in a table, and then it just becomes a matter of changing the table anytime those pairings need to change. So, a lot of business rules that are out there that you can implement in a prescriptive fashion. Probably is the most common type of shipper business rule we run into, and we run into a lot. Example would be like a wholesaler. They're shipping to a retail partner, and they need for particular retail partners to produce shipping documentation for advanced shipping notification. A lot of 3PLs have a lot of prescriptive business logic because they're trying to meet specific client requirements. If they're shipping on behalf of client X, ship everything prepaid on the 3PL's account number. But if they're shipping for client Y, then ship it maybe third-party billing to client Y's account number. So we do that a lot with the various shippers that we implement ProShip for. And again, it's very common for us to do that, and we like to find nice ways to manage that.
Yeah, and Clint, as you said that, I'm going to give the simplest prescriptive business rule that is a good prescriptive business rule, and that is dangerous goods. If we find that a shipment has dangerous goods, we will only use the dangerous goods rate shop group. However, rate shopping itself is a good example of a algorithmic business rule, where we simply feed in data to the system and let it make the best choice. Okay. Now, of course, algorithmic business rules take significantly longer to create, but they're significantly more flexible. Okay, Cody or Jeff, did you guys want to add more to that?
Yeah, I was kind of look at the algorithmic.
Or the algorithm-based.
The algorithm-based. It's more of a complicated version sometimes of prescriptive, in the sense there's using multiple factors. It's not just one. It's what the destination temperature is. What's the weight of the product you're shipping? How many days do you have to get it there? There's multiple factors to take into account to get a result out, and those factors can change. There's variables that are taking place, and depending on those variables changing, the outcome changes. And that's kind of more how I view those type of things.
Yeah, I think of prescriptive as being like single input and algorithmic as being multi-input.
Yeah.
And if you think about it though, Jeff, everything you just said there, we want to take into account the item and the temperature and the origin and. Can you write that as a prescriptive business rule? Yes. How large is that chunk of code going to be, right? However, if you were to take the time, and this is the problem with an algorithmic business rule, is that an engineer, along with a business person who can say, yes, you're doing it right, needs to take a lot of time to actually go, all right, how do we make this into a smaller chunk of code that honors all of those variables and potentially more variables? Okay, so this is why, and I know in my experience writing code, the first time is prescriptive, the second time is hybrid, third or fourth, maybe fifth time, I start to get an algorithm that actually functions so much better than the first 20, 30, or 300 lines of code.
Yeah, right? I think we've all been there, where you're writing a function, it's just like if this, if this, and you get 20 if statements, you're like, there's got to be a better way of doing this. So and that's when you gotta rethink of it and take a different approach.
Yeah, well, the efficiency is really important too. Whenever you're pushing tens of thousands or hundred thousands of cartons through a line every day, especially if you got automation equipment and you need to apply that business rule, it's got to be very succinct and efficient, execute very quickly, or else it's going to bog down the process.
And I'd like to put in, look, the business rule you don't have to change is infinitely faster than the one that you have to refactor 30, 40, 50 lines of code to actually make a change. And so this is really why we push this to the ProShip customers, that concept of algorithmic versus prescriptive business rules, Because yes, there are places for prescriptive business rules. Many of them run faster, okay? But after a certain amount of time of adding prescriptive on top of prescriptive on top of prescriptive, the amount of time it takes just to make sure you're not breaking anything far exceeds the actual amount of time it should take to make the change. So at some point in time, refactoring that code to a prescriptive business rule can often save time down the line, and especially importantly, make things a lot more robust during peak season. Cody, did you want to add anything up to our prescriptive versus algorithmic conversation?
Yeah, you just touched on something I've been thinking throughout this, because this part of the cast I spent less time thinking about, but it really, you start off, you rough it in, you start working out the box. You know, the input goes into the box, and out comes, I'm talking about the code being, you know, a box. Something goes in, something comes out, not shipping box, but you work that out with the customer, you get it to have the right output, to appear to work the right way, and then you go back and you refactor and you make it efficient, you make it clean. And then the next time you go in, you always follow a similar process, but you also need to kind of follow the Boy Scout rule: leave it better than you found it. And if anybody drops that piece, you know, that little piece of professionalism, it certainly can get out of hand easily.
Yeah, and I'm going to tell you that business rule changes and leave it better than you found it are diametrically opposed with one another in the business world. So again, we're talking about this because this is something we're trying to push to CFOs, to logistics managers, things of that nature. But as all of us who are software engineers know, it's an extremely important thing, especially when you're going to use a software product for a decade or more. If you don't take the time to do that refactoring, to go from prescriptive to algorithmic where you need to, you're not going to enjoy the software as much as you could.
Yeah,
but moving on,
well, I just want to say it's a subtle part of the value proposition, right? Because you produce a shipping label, you can produce it fast, you can rate shop, all these different things, but really the capability to incorporate business logic, to incorporate it very efficiently and easy to manage is important. But it's also, when you're talking about the way the logic is written, you're really talking about people. You're talking about the experience of the engineer who's writing that code, and that is every bit as much important as the software capability itself, and something that can't be overlooked: the experience and the capability of the engineer who's implementing the logic and designing it and architecting how that's going to work.
And continuing to move on here, one of the things that's implied in CI/CD, one of our first topics, is that you have some type of a separation of concerns, right? And I think we talked a little bit about that. But in ProShip's case, we describe the separation of carrier business rules, the separation of the core of the ProShip solution. We've always described those as modules, okay? And whether we're using modules or containers or something of that nature, I really want the team here to talk about why do we use, in ProShip's case, modules, and how is that, along with any design principles or anything like that, that it makes us a better product.
I can take this one. The modules that we have largely are one-to-one with one of our code repositories. So when we need to add a new feature or add a new module, we have a defined process. We follow it. It results in some new things in our issue tracker, a new project in GitLab, and it gets added at a certain point into our license and updating system. And all of these things, once they're in place, link into the CI/CD process, and that separation is enforced throughout. Even from yes, Git itself allows us to have multiple feature branches being worked on at the same time, but that is also respected by the CI/CD process. Multiple people can be working on different things on the same single module. They can get them blessed by QA and merged into the main branch and get on their way to production at different times at the same time, and CI/CD just holds up. We know throughout that the build works. We know throughout that that module continues to maintain its integrity, and we know the history of those changes within our update system. So just having that separation of the modules enforced in all of these different places really helps us along.
Yeah, and I will say from a business standpoint, I know we're mostly technical here, predictability is often more important than performance. Jeff, what did you want to add here?
Listening to Cody, he kind of, touched on a bit of the QA, and that's a very important part of this is, if we had, one big monolithic piece of software, if we made any changes to it, everything would have to be regression test. You would have to test everything for all those pieces. Having individual modules that are separate from a different module makes making changes easier because of that QA process. It's a smaller chunk, it's a smaller piece. It's easier to focus on that small change and what that affects than the whole system.
Excellent, excellent. I'm going to continue to keep us moving on here. The next conversation is premise versus cloud. Okay, why does it matter? What is our opinion? And why does ProShip do what ProShip does? I'm just going to throw this one up there for the team. Whoever wants to grab it first.
Yeah, no, when it comes to cloud versus on-prem, it's amazing the journey that we've had in this company. When I started, tremendous focus, like we on-prem all the way. Don't reach out for the APIs if we can help it. Let's get all of the data local. That way, it's as available as possible within the on-premise infrastructure of that customer. That's still going to be the fastest way, the highest volumes to do your shipping. But the industry has evolved, and my opinion of the way that the sophistication of the carrier's ability to produce a good API with good uptime and good throughput potential has really changed. And at this point, I would say unopinionated. We will build what the customer needs, and what each customer needs is going to be different. Many customers will be cloud only with their own infrastructure, and many customers will be on-prem only with all of their infrastructure, and we have to be prepared for both.
Yeah, I agree, especially when it comes down to, and going back to the modular approach we just talked about, you may have 3 carriers that you rely 95% on, and another 5 carriers that split that 5%. Those 5 carriers probably don't need to be the sub 10 millisecond shipment execution solution that the larger 3 need to be, right? So that ability to mix and match for ease of maintenance, for ease of configuration, but also have those on-prem solutions for that raw power that an API will never be able to match, I think provides us with a great solution. I'm going to roll through a little bit further here, and I want to drop one more thing before we start to wrap this up. Let's talk about disaster recovery. Okay. Now, as we know, one of the things that might be asked, especially on-prem versus cloud, right? The concern that anybody has with a solution, especially a mission-critical solution such as a shipping software, is how do we deal with disaster recovery? Is it even needed, right? Come on, our system is mostly a stateless system. Why do you need disaster recovery for a stateless system?
It depends on your level of risk. So I think there's different kind of categories for disaster recovery. What's your tolerance? How much downtime can you be? Do you have alternatives if you were web services? Do you have a premise solution in that sense? Is there a hybrid solution we have set up? So I think it all depends as a customer basis. We've come up and we work with the customer, and it's usually tailored to their needs, their business needs, what their uptime requirements are, how risk averse they are, to put it frankly.
I would also add to that. I think it's depending on the customer, it's mostly a matter of policy. It's less of a decision made in, we definitely need 5 nines of uptime and this can't go down. It's more of a decision of, no, this enterprise has decided on an IT level that we need systems that are, built to this specification. And in modern software, I think there's a bit of a fallacy in there. Because one of the things that I've always been impressed by with ProShip historically, especially if you have largely on-prem carriers, is the amount of shipping you can do on a single robust system is tremendous. And the uptime of a system with good hardware is better than I think people give it credit for. And the amount of time it takes to just spin up a new box, and now you have that same level of reliability. I'm not really recommending that everybody go host your shipping at home in the garage, but I think it's one of those things where people don't necessarily take into account the complexity involved in building a 5.9 system or whatever it might be.
Yeah, and you know what? I think I remember when it happened. Right? When all of a sudden you were so concerned about a piece of hardware failing to the point where those of us deep in IT weren't. And that was when virtual servers started to come out. Why? Because the hypervisor level now does so much to ensure that that operating system is safe. The risk of you dropping an entire hypervisor, the impact on your business is probably going to be a lot more than just shipping. You're probably going to have order problems. You're going to have inventory problems. You're going to have a lot of problems besides just shipping. Okay. But that being said, I do want to reiterate that a shipping system day to day is effectively stateless unless you're future shipping. So once you've closed out for a day, the data that's on that server, because we keep history off of our server, the history that is on that, or the data that's on that server, is no longer relevant. Okay, and we've worked really hard to design a system that does not rely upon yesterday's data, does not rely upon last manifest data. Okay, and what has this done? This has provided us with a high level of speed, such that OMSs and other sourcing systems can ask a lot of questions because all of our rates are stateless. And something that is secure in the event of we're installed in a warehouse and that warehouse temporarily doesn't have internet connectivity. It, with premise engines, is capable of continuing to work. And of course, premise engines still make it so that you can ship even if a carrier's APIs have browned out due to excessive load, or worst case scenario, and luckily we're seeing this a lot less, have failed due to overload as well. So there's more to, especially when we're looking at shipping software, there's more than just, like Cody was saying, how many nines are we going to produce with one operating systems, X cores and X RAM. So with that, let me go around the loop here, and let's go ahead and see, does anybody have any final advice, any last words that they want to tell our technical audience? Otherwise, this will be the end of our first ever technical ParcelCast. Jeff, let me go ahead and start with you.
Sure. Some advice that I'd like people to know is if you're going to get ProShip as a new shipping software, it's a good opportunity to look at your current business rules, your processes, and make sure they fit and they all make sense. There's a lot of times, customers don't take full advantage of all the features that they could get with moving to a shipping software like ProShip. And it's a good opportunity to make sure that, just because this is how you guys are doing it today, doesn't mean that's how it has to stay in the future.
Excellent. Clint, any last words from you?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we talk about shipping software and we look at things like, rate shop savings or system efficiency, or we call workflow efficiencies, things of that nature, we think a lot of things on the business side. And absolutely, to Jeff's point, anytime you're implementing a solution like ProShip, it's time to look at the end-to-end process. What all can we bring to the table to improve efficiencies, give visibility across the business, et cetera. But what I like about this podcast, today's call, is that it goes even deeper into the ones and zeros behind the solution. And it really speaks to, the quality of the ingredients, right? The care that goes into preparing the recipe and cooking it in the kitchen. It's the things that go on, behind the kitchen doors, that I think gives our customers a high degree of success and high degree of confidence in implementing a system that can also bring to bear all those business efficiencies.
And Cody, any last conversations from you?
Oh, wow. I think I'll take the opportunity to say, just as the system is never is a living organism from ProShip's perspective, the business rules, the modules, the carriers, everything. As a customer of ProShip or anyone with any other shipping company, any of them, if you're given multiple environments, use them. Like, don't just think, all right, shipping is done. No, just leverage them. There are ways that you can improve your own process with your own test servers. And if you don't poke at it, you'll never achieve that full potential of the system. And I feel like that is something that needs more awareness out there.
Okay. And my last bit of advice is nobody should ever have to press a space bar more than once or carriage return more than once. So if the IDE takes care of it for you, spaces are fine. You never need 2 carriage returns. Okay. That being said, if you want to learn more about ProShip, please visit us at proshipinc.com. If you have any questions, just a reminder, you can reach us at sales@proshipinc.com or 800-353-7774. We hope you join us for the next ParcelCast.